Welcome everyone. I would just like to wait a little bit more for maybe one or two more guests to arrive. Otherwise, welcome you all in this webinar. I will give you all a formal introduction and some preliminary information about the webinar today. Yes, it's 5 past, so we can probably start already. So welcome you all. This is the MLE Friends webcast series called Beyond Confines, Following Our Tracks. And this is actually the third series on education. The Q&A session, we have the chance to meet all the presenters and speakers in the series and hear their summaries and ask questions from them. First of all, I would like to introduce Katherine Weare. She is a wonderful friend of Mind and Life Europe, member of the Mind and Life Europe Association, emeritus professor at the University of Southampton, UK, and principal investigator for the Mind and Life Europe Community of Contemplative Education Initiative. She is known internationally for her work on well-being, social and emotional learning, mental health and mindfulness in education. And she has been the host of these 3 series, which we are concluding today. It's wonderful to have you here, Katherine, and I would let you introduce our guests, the other speakers in the series, in this particular series. My name is Gabor Karsai. I'm the Managing Director of Mind and Life Europe, and I hope you all will have a wonderful meeting and discussion. Just for you to know that we are recording this discussion and event in case there is wider interest in the general audience in the future. We would like to make these discussions available online at a later stage outside our MLE Friends community, who are here today to listen to you all, and thank you for being part of this discussion. Let me know if you would not like to be recorded. Your questions or your discussion in the end or in the second half of the program will be the one when you will show up. Otherwise, the speakers will be presented in the recorded version of this meeting. I wish you all a good discussion and thank you for joining. Katherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, the way I'll just talk a little about how we're going to organise this. Those of us who were speakers are going to give a short summary of what we said. Some of you may be relieved about that because it may be a while since you watched them, or some you might not have watched them all. We're not expecting that. So you will get a summary. So we've got some grist to the mill of what we want to talk about. We try and keep ourselves brief while we do that. So we have plenty of time to for questions. We'd like to invite you to put your questions, or at least an indication of what your question's about, in the chat function. And please do that as we go. Don't wait necessarily till the end. And Gabor is going to manage that. And those of us who are presenting will answer them as best we can, whoever seems to be the most appropriate person to do that. So that would be nice. And it would be hoping that we might see some of you. We're looking at muted names at the moment, so when you feel that you can come out of your shell, that would be lovely. But maybe you're somewhere, I don't know, on a beach somewhere and not looking fit for consumption, so do whatever you'd like to, but welcome everyone. And I think I recognize most names in the group. Okay, right. To say a little bit about the whole series, you may be aware that we've had actually three arcs to this series. And in the first 2, we looked at the principles and how we implement this area. And in this third one, we're looking very much at cutting edge questions, new issues, difficulties, things that we're all thinking about, particularly in our work, and possibly which represent the cutting edge of where the field is at the moment. So feel free, all of you, to pose difficult questions or comments. You know, this is not for us all to congratulate each other. It's to raise some of the gritty issues that are getting to us. And I think we realized when we were talking just before we started that there's kind of 3 or 4 main arcs to what we're talking about. One is the need for the field to come of age and be aware of the need to do no harm and the adverse effects and the unintended consequences of this area. So that's, I think, something we're going to be talking about. Another is the need to make sure there is an ethical base to the work that we do, that it isn't just about helping individuals to become more effective in the world in terms of their own success or earning more money or whatever, that it's got to have an ethical base. This is not ethics free, and we'll be looking at how that gets applied in the different programs that are represented by the excellent speakers here. The need for mindfulness and contemplative approaches to be embedded in other areas such as social emotional learning or contemplative pedagogy, the wider field, because of the need, final point, to make sure that the work we do is engaged with the real issues that are facing humanity at the moment, which are getting increasingly of concern, and we'll be looking at how that actually is happening in teacher education, in schools and so on. So those are our particular issues. But if there's anything else anyone wants to add, feel free to do that. And the speakers we have very much represent people who are actually trying to make this happen in real life programs with children, with teachers in the actual world. We're not just talking theoretically here, we're talking about what happens when you try and live this work. And I think that's quite exciting. One speaker unfortunately can't be here. Karlheinz Valtl is not well, so you'll have to put up with me doing 3 summaries, one of which will be his lovely talk on teacher education. Okay, that's by way of introduction. I'm going to spread myself out, you'll be glad to know. So I'm just going to start by summarising what I had to say in my talk about the need to do no harm. Because I think the field is coming of age and realising that we need to take care on that front. And I talked about 2 kind of types of problem. One is the sort of everyday stuff that can go wrong for all of us. What can happen for all of us if we don't take care. And some of the problems that we're very much seeing in schools and elsewhere are misunderstandings about what this whole field's about, where people think that it's about chasing a feel-good state and pushing away the difficult, and relaxation and calm. This is possibly one of the most common areas of misunderstandings. And of course, when that doesn't happen for people, because it doesn't happen routinely, people give up and say, I'm no good at this. So that can be a problem. Some people tend to leap on it as a panacea and avoid all other coping mechanisms, or to over-identify with it and alienate other people, but by becoming smug and elitist about it. And there's a tendency sometimes to see it as something that we do instead of taking action. I can't tell you the number of times when I've had a problem that one of my friends says, why don't you just sit with it? And after a while I don't want to sit with it, I want something to be different. And I think that can be one of the problems, that we get so contemplative that we don't link up with the social world. And then of course the problem of tending to see it, if we're not careful, very much as an individual matter, and not do enough to help link up with the social and people acting together, and to make sure that we do constantly link up with these social issues. And then the second, perhaps larger area, is this question of trauma, and whether particularly mindfulness meditation or different types of meditation are for everyone. And I think what we're starting to do is to tease out the difference between mindfulness as an attitude of kindness and compassion and open-minded curiosity, and formal eyes closed sitting meditation practice. And I think we're becoming aware that that is not for everybody, and can, in some people, trigger trauma and difficulty, and the need to engage in trauma-informed practice in education. And I think at this point, I'll pass on to you, Mikkel, if I may, because this is something that I know your programme particularly deals with.
Yeah, thanks, Katherine.
And please introduce yourself. I should have said, Mikkel runs a fabulous project called Youth Mindfulness, but you can tell us about that.
Yeah. So I run a project based in Glasgow called Youth Mindfulness, and we've been around for about 8 or 9 years now. And we develop programs both for children and for teenagers and young adults. We've also spent a lot of time working with young men in prison. And so what I wanted to talk to you about today was some kind of learning that really informed our program for teenagers, adolescents, young adults. When I started this work, I was principally working with young children in primary schools. And in developing that, the program that we have for the young ones, what we found, generally speaking across the board, was that you could go into a classroom of young children, 30 kids in a class, and you could deliver an activity, a lesson, something, and generally speaking, it would work really pretty well, like 95% of the time. And then there's a kind of a receptivity, and those of you who know, who've worked with young people, with young kids, probably see that kind of receptivity, that bright eyes, you know, when you bring them something new, or you bring in a meditation bell, they're just all eager to learn. Of course, those of us who've worked with teenagers know that we have a very different attitude that we see when we walk into a room of teenagers, and they look at you with this kind of disdain, contempt, you know. And what we found is we started sharing this work is sometimes it would work well, sometimes not so well. And we try to understand, you know, what is the foundation that needs to be there that's really going to support the learning. And what we really discovered in our work was that stress is kind of ubiquitous among teenagers. You know, when we ask the question, when we work with young people, we'd ask the questions, you know, do you ever feel stressed? And almost every one of them tells us yes. And we ask them, you know, what stresses you out? And they have a long list of things that stress them out. And for a lot of them, school is a big source of stress. Another question we'd often ask 13, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, do you ever feel judged? And again, this is very, very across the board. The answer was always, yeah, I feel judged all the time. And they often feel judged by the peers, they feel judged by the teachers, they often feel judged by the education system as a whole, like this constant source of judgment. And so what became clear to us was that a lot of young people, maybe not all young people, but I would probably say more than half of young people are kind of in a state of low-level stress quite a lot of the time, and are kind of in a state of fear of judgment of others. So when you bring in something like mindfulness into that space, naturally there's a lot of defensiveness, there's a lot of guardedness, there's a lot of waiting to see how their schoolmates are going to respond. And so what we felt was that what's really, really important was to get the young people into a space of feeling at ease. What we think of as like physiological safeness, like their whole nervous system is in a state of relaxation, ease, comfort. And then when they're in that space, they're able to be more exploratory. They're able to be more curious. They're able to kind of open up to whatever learning might be available to them. And so the kind of principle that we put at the heart of our program was this idea that we sum up in these words, relationship before content. And we found that if you put relationship first, because we're social creatures, if young people feel kind of connected to the teacher, the facilitator, if they feel connected to each other, then they go into a space of more safeness, more trust. And then the learning we found really kind of flows pretty easily. And the most powerful way we found to support the young people feeling kind of safe and at ease was through relationships. But the kind of way into that is through fun, actually making things fun and games. And that really kind of builds off of some of Barbara Fredrickson's work on positive emotions. And her work shows that when we experience a positive emotion with another person, it actually is the very thing that starts to bind us to that other person. It's the kind of fuel that builds friendships and trust. So that's what we found is really important. And we also found this was especially important. This kind of learning also dovetailed with the increasing awareness around trauma and how ubiquitous trauma is. One of the big things that we discovered was that it's quite a well-known piece of research that about 50% of young people, by the time they're at the age of 18, will have experienced one adverse childhood event, one adverse childhood experience. That might be some kind of dysfunction in the home, whether it's a parent with a drug or alcohol issue, a relative in prison, maybe violence in the home, or it might be physical or emotional or kind of sexual abuse or neglect towards them as a person. So it's kind of a shocking find that 50% of young people will experience one of those events by the time they're 18, and about 14% will have experienced 4 or more. And so the other thing that kind of informed this kind of approach of putting relationship and physiological safeness first was the fact that trauma is not some kind of rare kind of unusual occurrence. It's actually in every classroom you go into, every group of young people you work with, there's a really, really high chance that some of them have maybe experienced some really difficult things in their life, and there might be ongoing stress from that. So that's what kind of informed that kind of approach that we took.
Thank you, Michael. And that's really, really helpful. And in the talk I gave, I talked a little more about the research around trauma in young people, which Mikkel's picking up on in his everyday work, that this realization that mindfulness, in the sense of formal meditation practice, is not for everyone all the time, and the need to take care to look after the vulnerable, to give young people other ways out, other things to do. And I know Michael's got some great stories on that if people want to ask him for questions. How do you manage that in the classroom is, I think, increasingly what we're realizing, and applies, of course, to adult learning too. Mikkel, I wonder if we could come to you next, because your wonderful C-Learning program, it also picks up on this issue. So you might want to pick up on that and then talk about some of the other areas that interest you, like cell and ethics. Unmute.
Always, yes. Thank you, Katherine, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Mikkel, for your presentation and for the project you are doing. My name is my name is Mikkel. You already know that. I work for the C-Learning program, which is based in Atlanta, but in Georgia, USA. At Emory University, but which is an international program, and it's been so from the outset. And we are present in more than 35 countries, working with educators and students, mostly through schools. From the very beginning, it was clear to us as well that C-Learning has to be trauma informed and resiliency based, because of the research that Mikkel shares, and because of the experience that we had with introducing simple mindfulness practices to children and youth, and seeing effects that were actually counter to what we were hoping for. So we have a whole chapter in C-Learning. Chapter 2 is dedicated only to building what we call building resiliency, and it's based on Elaine Miller-Karras' work at the Trauma Research Institute, and what's called the Community Resiliency Model. So we're really teaching just really basic well-being skills, how to regulate the nervous system. We are educating the children about their body, about the nervous system, and helping them to understand that it's normal to be activated. It's normal to feel bumped out of what we call our resilience zone, our zone of well-being, and that we can learn simple techniques to help ourselves to get back into our zone where we can actually function. We can learn better. We have better relationships. And we feel more happy. So that's a very important element of C-Learning, and there are many which I also explain in my presentation that was recorded. C-Learning exists within a very rich field of education. So trauma informed is one aspect of C-Learning. We also drawing on research in social emotional learning. We're drawing on research in mindfulness. So it has all of that. But first and foremost, C-Learning is really a program for what we call secular ethics. I think Ola is going to talk about it as applied ethics, and it has to do with it's really basic human values. And the Dalai Lama gives the example of water and tea, and he says that water is really what we all need. Water. Some may prefer tea, some like different kind of tea, but water is really what's essential to life. And in the same way, we believe that we can teach basic human values without referring to specific cultural or religious traditions, and for everyone. And we can do so based on common experience, common sense, and science. And if we look at the problems that we are facing today, and I know Katherine is going to speak more about that, problems like climate crisis, problems like an increased sense of us versus them, some of the problems that Ronnie is going to talk about in between Palestinians and Israeli children. All of these problems, an aspect of these problems which the Dalai Lama emphasizes again and again, and which is at the core of the Sea Learning program, is the fact that we don't really we don't really understand the common humanity, and we don't really understand interdependence enough. So we don't really appreciate that we are basically all born and we are basically all going to die. We all have a body, we all have a nervous system, we all get bumped out of our zone, and we get aggressive and we do things that we regret. And we can start to appreciate that in so many ways we are actually more similar than we are different. And same with interdependence. The environmental crisis wouldn't happen if we understood the effects of our actions and understood how much we depend on resources all over the world, and how our actions are affecting not just the near environment but also the far environment. So that's what we explore in Sea Learning through a very simple framework of we have 3 dimensions: awareness, compassion, and engagement, and we look at them at 3 levels: of the personal level, the social level, our relationships, and the system levels, the environment and the world as such. Yes, that's it for now.
Thank you, Mikkel. Great. And again, Mikkel has many practical stories attached to that, you know, of how you actually do this in real life with teachers and students. It's terrific stuff. Okay, Orlaith, it might make sense to come to you next, if you don't mind. We can't say we haven't got friends in high places. We have the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh on our side, so we should be all right. Orlaith is coordinator of the Wake Up Schools programme, which is one very near to my heart, having worked on that with the Happy Teachers book. So tell us about that, Orlaith, and the themes that you're looking at.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Yeah, so my name is Orlaith. I'm joining you from Dublin in Ireland, and I work with families, with schools, and with teachers, and I help coordinate Wake Up Schools. So that's an international grassroots movement to support Thich Nhat Hanh's vision for mindfulness in education. And it's funny, with the discussion around trauma, people often say to us about the practice that it's already trauma informed. So it was developed like largely in the 50s and 60s. But of course it was developed during wartime. And you know, we worked extensively with refugees. So the Plum Village Monastery kind of began as a refugee center for Vietnamese people. And we worked a lot with veterans of the American War in Vietnam. We've held retreats for Palestinian and Israeli people to come together, retreats for police, for healthcare workers. So there's a lot of experience in how we can come home to our bodies and be aware that that might not always feel like a safe place to be. So I thought I'd share about the 3 pillars of Wake Up Schools. We have 3 straightforward pillars: embodiment, service, and community. So we always begin with embodiment. We begin with teachers because we want to make maximum impact. And if one teacher can establish a kind, open presence, then that changes the whole classroom. In subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways. So everything is affected by that. Our second pillar is service, is one of service. So when we practice, we know that if I can create an energy of peace or kindness or connection, then that is not only a gift for me, but it's a gift for everybody else in my life, everyone I work with, everyone in my personal life. So one of the kind of the fires that keeps our practice going is to know that it is a gift onwards. It's an offering to our whole school, to our whole community, to our family home. And the third pillar, we are all about community. So our happiness is not an individual matter, and our suffering is not an individual matter. And I think the pandemic has demonstrated this in an extraordinary way over the last year, that we realize how interconnected we are. So when we practice mindfulness, we learn it as a path of living. So it's not, we do have a curriculum, but it's not so much about a curriculum. It's about how to live our life. And we explore, you know, what right mindfulness might be. And if there's a right mindfulness, then there's a mindfulness that's that's not right. So we explore how we can develop our qualities of attention and focus, and to make sure we do that in a heart-centered, wise way, so that we can live together well. So we have many explicit ethical supports. Our first name for Wake Up Schools was called Applied Ethics. It was developed in France when Nicolas Sarkozy had said, "Can anyone teach like how to be well in the classroom without mentioning religion?" And we were like, "Yes, we can." So we have many different instruments to help us kind of shine a light on both our communities and our own hearts. So for children, we have a transmission of the 2 promises, where children vow to develop their understanding in order to live peacefully with people, animals, plants, and minerals. And children get to explore these in beautifully creative ways. So they vow to aspire to develop understanding and compassion in how they live their lives. And then for adults, we have the 5 mindfulness trainings. And again, these are kind of like 5 stars. Like, think of them as a constellation to assess your direction of travel, just to see if you are going in the right direction. And they're very practical ways of exploring kind of our habit energies where we get stuck, and also giving ourselves a chance to visualize, well, what kind of life do I want to live? What kind of society do I want to be in? So they're very kind of everyday, daily supports for us, from contemplations before we eat food together to help us kind of bring the food to life and understand that it's the product of, hundreds and hundreds of people's work and a lot of different energy. So eating together is something we enjoy doing, and we aim to simply live in a mindful way. So formal sitting, or where you would look at someone and know they're practicing, might be a very, very small element of the day. It's really about how the energy that we bring through our whole day, and it's been described as refined SEL. We begin with an individual, and we allow them to then infuse the groups that they're part of, as though from water, it becomes tea when you have a potent thing that can disperse through. And then we can effortlessly share this clear foundation of ethics and ways to communicate and take care of disharmony. And so it becomes very much an ethos of a school or a community or a family home. And it being an ethos and not a curriculum is, I think, what makes it sustainable. That actually becomes simply imbued, becomes the way we live our life, and helps us take care of ourselves and helps us take care of each other. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Orla. Brilliant. Yes. Really wonderful stuff. I love this tea image that's sort of suffusing through the afternoon. Rony, would you like to share your very cutting edge work that you're doing, applying mindfulness, but in some of the most difficult areas of human experience, I think? Introduce yourself fully. We're delighted that Rony is part of our community. He's a major international figure in the work he does, and we're thrilled that he gives his time to our community.
Sorry, now I can do it. Sorry. I said that I was very excited about the accent. Half of the time I just heard the accent. It's just the music of people, particularly the Scottish thing. I could sort of imitate it, and the Mikkel things. It was really wonderful. My name is Ronnie Berger, and I'm at the Center of Compassion and Mindful Education in Tel Aviv University. It's a center that we essentially dedicate for training, teacher, and education, formal and informal education. We got more involved in the informal education because I think that is a neglected area. Anyway, it's really strange that you talk about the issue of trauma, because while I'm talking in my talk about prejudice reduction, my major expertise is in trauma. I've been in all the major disaster around the world in the 30 years, going with humanitarian aid thing, doing consulting to governments, you name it, all the shooting around in the United States, all the tsunamis, all the things I've been involved in. Now, I would agree with you that it's a dilemma to use. This is not what I'm going to talk about, but since you comment about that, I'll make a comment about trauma. I think it is an issue working with mindfulness with trauma, and I think that we have developed means by which to deal with that. It's interesting that part of our education that we deal is dealing with resiliency. I've developed actually a resiliency program that is now in 15 countries around the world, which is not mindfulness based. It's essentially a social emotional program that we began to develop in Israel, and now we have done it in different areas in Africa, in Asia, in United States. And I do think that we have to take care of issues when we work with mindfulness, because stabilization is one of the key issues, and you can flood people when you start with mindfulness. However, there is a way to mix mindfulness with other technique, which I'm not going to talk about it, but you just want to comment around that. So I'm glad to hear that people are conscious and aware of that. Sometimes in Israel they are not, and we found a lot of people using mindfulness and really flood people without knowing how to stabilize them before they go into, moving them into their inner spaces without knowing what to do afterwards. Okay, so our program is called Call to Care. It was done in the Mind and Life in United States. I was one of the writers, a few other good people, one of them in Emory University. I assume you know Brooke. Do you know Brooke?
Yes.
She's one of the writers of the program. And essentially, it was a takeoff of two programs. One was my Erase Stress manual, which is the SEL manual that I was talking about before. And the other one is something that, John Makaransky developed around Buddhist practices. And we tried to mix them together. So anyway, the Call to Care Israel is a bit different than the Call to Care United States. Now we have many studies that suggest of the efficacy of the program. And the program is built on 4 pillars. The first pillar is basic mindfulness practices. We call it mindfulness to different aspects of mindfulness. I'll tell you what we do with teachers and what we do with kids later on. So this is one set of practices that we teach either kids or adults, educators. The 3 other components of the programs are teaching people to accept care from others. Now, this is really interesting because a lot of people do not know how to be compassionate to themselves, nor to be taking from others. So we look at things, and we were influenced by the way, by my head is spacey today. Sorry. This is a 6 Zoom that I had today. I'm zoom out of my mind. Paul Gilbert, CFT, Compassion Focused Therapy, and we look at the blockage to compassion, why people cannot be compassionate, both kids and educators, and we train them around that. So one component is the taking care of themselves through others. Then we deal with another component, which is called self-care, taking off some of Neff concept and, Paul Gilbert concept, and we teach them how to be kind to themselves on a daily basis, not just by practices. But like Ola, you said, we are more interested in how they live their life rather than how they sit in meditation. It's nice to be trained in meditation, but if you only do meditation, this is not life. This is just being in a bunker or in a cave and whatever. So we teach them how to do that. And the third thing, which is what I talked about in my talk, was taking care of others or, extending care for others. And this is really critical in Israel because we have a very mixed society and a very sort of strange groups, not only Arabs and Israeli, within Israeli. We have very religious people, non-religious people. We have sporadic Jews that came from, African country. We have Ashkenazi Jews. So it's a very complex society, and we need to find a way by which to talk to each other and respect each other. So some of the work we did suggests that if we work on 2 major aspect. One of them is mindfulness and compassion, the skill itself, and the other one is contact theory. That is, how do we bring people to get familiarized with each other, both on an individual level and in the cultural level, and we mix them together. We see a very significant change in the way they look at others, stereotype others. And we see a reduction in stereotyping and prejudice. And that is really exciting because up to now, you know, some of the program, I don't know exactly what you're doing, Gola, but some of the camps that were done in the United States and other were bringing Palestinian and Israelis, very, you know, mixed group with very strong emotions. They had a wonderful time, but when they came down to the ground and see what's happening in the ground, you know, things got evaporated slowly. And in our study, one of the studies that I quoted, we looked at how to do it on an ongoing basis. And we had a follow-up of, I'd say, a year and a half. And a year and a half in Israel, when there is a lot of military operation, and still people maintain a positive view of the other, this is extraordinary. I think it's the only, you know, study that showed that you can, if you work deeply on connecting people and working on giving them skills of mindfulness and compassion, you can actually bring them to come together even in difficult times. So to me, that is the most important part. What we work is we work in both Jewish schools and you know, Palestinian or Arab schools in Israel. In Israel, the educational system is split. The Arabs go to Arab school and the Jews go to Jews, and they oftentimes don't mix. So we bring them together, you know, and we teach them those skills, and we teach the educators. One of the things that I want to say, and this is really important to me, is, and that is also part of my other programs, I always teach teachers and do not bring people to work directly with the kids, because it builds a capacity for the locals to continue. They know the kids better. The fact that we are experts in mindfulness and compassion is not the issue. They learn how to deal with them, and they develop a language within the school. Now we work also with parents to give an holistic program. So we work with the parents, we work with the educators, and we work with the administration in order to deal with the other, you know, teachers in a more humane way. So it's a holistic type of view that we take. And I talked about the effect in terms of prejudice reduction, but we also have a significant effect in other capacity, mental health stuff, learning, etc., etc. So that's basically what we do in Israel. And thank you for the chance. And I probably go to my next Zoom at 8 o'clock. This will be with parents.
So we may
Life
lose
is
you.
tough in Israel.
Yes, we may lose you shortly, Rony, but we'll try and put your questions first. I'm going to be very, very quick through the two final presentations I wanted to talk about. I would very much recommend anyone to look at Karlheinz's fantastic presentation of what he's doing at his university in Austria, introducing mindfulness into initial teacher education. This is really groundbreaking. That most of the programs we're talking about are for practicing teachers. This is going right back to where a teacher is at the beginning, and it's so imaginative what he's doing there. He's basically got a 9-week course which he modelled initially around mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, but he does some wonderful things in the middle of this. In the middle of the course, the students get together at a home and engage in mindful cooking and share a meal together. And at the end of the course, they have a kind of mini conference, or not so mini really, 200 people usually wind up coming. The whole university gets invited. They have students do presentations, they have outside speakers, so they really bring it together. It's a very imaginative program. But the core of it, and he summarizes what he feels is the core of the work that he's doing, is that it is based very much on practice, so that the students learn a practice. It's based on a very clear structure. It's based on student inquiry. He's very keen on the inquiry side of it. And what he discovers through this course is that it causes students to actually start to examine the very roots of what they think education is about. They really, you know, it's a transformational course. It's not just about stress reduction. It's about them actually starting to say, what am I trying to do here? What he doesn't do is to teach them to teach students. That's sort of an incidental thing that comes in on the side. But his strong belief is that this is about the embodiment of the teacher themselves. And I would very much recommend his talk to you. It's terrific. And I'm just going to talk incredibly fast through what I said in my final talk, because really people have picked it all up already. It's making the case for why the work we're doing in contemplative education links with the real life crises that we're facing in the world. There was an excellent talk by Jamie Bristow around this issue as well, talking about agency. And I think it's a case that we do need to make, because it's so easy to dismiss what we're doing as self-indulgent and peripheral, and we need to be putting this right at the centre, so that organisations like UNESCO, who are hoping to transform what we mean by education, realise that they need contemplative education to be a major part of this work, and it's not always obvious. So things like making clear what the relationship between inner life and outer life are. Zach Stein talks about investing in a new kind of human if we're going to meet the problems that face humanity, and what contemplative education does to build the attention, the ability to engage in metacognition, to think about thinking, compassion, basically a whole set of new inner capacities that people are going to need to address the crises that face us. Mm-hmm. In the process of which people think more clearly, there's more critical thinking going on, people are more able to face the difficult, and particularly to face the fact that they're part of the problem. It reduces the us and them thinking. Common humanity helps us to realise that the dark side is within all of us. This is not other people, and to work together with others, and to do things like to manage complexity, because the modern world is hopelessly complex, and to be comfortable with complexity, and to think subtly, to get rid of dualistic black and white thinking, and most of all to see the connection between what we're doing and with our lives and that of other people, and to feel empowered. Jamie talks very well, Jamie Bristow, about a sense of agency, a sense of optimism, because the thing that perhaps is going to scupper us most is if we all lapse into gloom and despondency. So how do we use the work that we're doing to give people a sense of realistic hope, not facile nonsense, but actual belief that these crises are things that we can tackle together. And I think what Rony was just talking about with his particular area really illustrates that. So that's very rapidly what I tried to talk about. I'd at this point very much love to invite those of you out there to pose us some questions. If you've got something you want to say, just raise a hand or pop it in the chat if you would. And it doesn't have to be a question. You may want to add something. You may want to give us a little few minutes of what you think are the cutting edges, or your experience of working with difficulty or trauma or ethics or whatever, really. So floor really is open to you folks out there.
Thank you, Katherine, for your hosting and organizing this series of webcasts. And thank you, Michael, Orla, Rony, Mikkel, Karlheinz, of course, and you, Katherine, for your speeches. I may start then. I do have a question, and that may initiate further discussions. You may remember the title of this series, which was, I can just quickly repeat, Emerging and Challenging Areas and Next Steps for Contemplative Education. So if you look at your daily work in the settings that you have just elaborated or explained, how do you see the next steps for contemplative education? I know it's a simple question and difficult to ask probably, but we at MLE would be really keen to hear your views from the field where you are working on these issues on a daily basis. How do you see the next steps? What are the next steps? What are the topics to discuss or the challenges to face and identify maybe first?
May I take it up? Because I'm running soon, so I'll give my 2 cents before. I'm particularly keen on exploring the fact that we often preach to the choir. That is, we work with people who are more inclined to sort of get our views and accept our practices and do it. It's within my group. This is a very interesting discussion because they tend to say, Ronnie, let's go to the people and show that we do well. And I say, let's go to the people who don't want to accept us and see if we can do something about it. We in fact recently offered, a workshop like in Britain to the parliament. Obviously, most of us in Israel don't like the politician now because they give us, this is the fifth selection we have, nothing is going on, it's stalemate, nothing going on, and we wanted to give them some humanity because they go at each other. So this is one area that is very important, how we reach out to people who are in the periphery and they are not inclined to hear our talk. That's one question that I have, and we're struggling with that, and we're trying to think about different concepts, which bring me to another aspect which I began to actually research, and that is motivational aspect. We know, even when I teach school and teachers are excited and tell me this is one of the best training that I had, they do not practice. They do not practice and they do not live up. They don't walk their talk. And so my question is, how do we increase the motivation for people to live mindfully and to live compassionately? I think those are issues that really bother me because after all, we invest a lot of time and energy in doing this training, and we want the results to infiltrate down. So I bring it up. I don't have an answer to that, although I am fiddling with few ideas about, internal motivation, external motivation, do some research around that, but I don't know the answer, and I don't know that anybody know the answer. Except it's actually a bigger question, because if we can change behavior, whether eating, sleeping, or any other things, whoever find the key to that is definitely going to get a Nobel Prize for that. So I just wanted to know what you think about that.
Thank you, Ronnie. I think the Nobel Prize is awaiting.
No, not for me.
Some of us here, but you actually. Let's see. Is there anyone else who would like to respond to this particular question?
I guess, Gabor, I tried to cover a bit of that in the areas that I highlighted, and I would echo what Rony's saying. The need to talk to people who are not already committed. And I think that is where we need to really articulate what's the point of this stuff in terms of the real life social issues that are facing people. So to stop seeing it as obvious that meditation is lovely and that we're all nice people and this is, feeding what we already know, but to say, okay, if how do we help people face the difficult? How do we help people to work together with others? All the things that really are bothering people, we need to reframe the rationale for what we're doing in terms of the things that are bothering people in the world, and to focus much more on the outer issues and to make the case for why working with the inner person is a vital way of addressing that. I'm not saying that's easy, Rony. I mean, I agree with you that these are the really difficult ones, but I think we've got to think much more of what it is that appeals to people, and to talk about the neuroscience and what's happening in the brain, and why the attention is so important. People understand attention. They can see their attention being hijacked by their mobile phone, by the media all around them, and helping people to realize what a valuable commodity this is another way through that appeals to ordinary people.
If I may follow what you say, Katherine, one of the dilemmas is that we're dealing with intrapsychic concept, essentially. And there's a big word out there. When people are coming to Israel, there is a group that is called Mindfulness Without Border. And come on, guys, you think you're going to have peace by having people practice mindfulness in Israel? This is a joke. Sorry that I'm saying that. There is a lot of bigger macro issues that we need to address as well. And I think Paul Gilbert recently wrote a wonderful article about the competitiveness and the culture and Swedish capitalism. I think we need to think in those concepts also, and bring into the fore not only inner subjective practices, but other things that could really change the world in a more significant way. This is just my opinion.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Just say, I think where contemplative education is becoming part of social emotional learning, the slightly wider field, is you know, and citizenship and compassion. I think these kind of areas, we can't just live in our little meditative bubble. We've got to say, how do we link with these wider things? Sorry, I interrupted there.
Maybe Orla would like to say something. And did I see you, Mikkel, also? You're signaling? Yeah, that's fine. So Orla first and then Mikkel.
Yeah, I was thinking in Uganda. So Wake Up Schools has offered retreats for teachers in Uganda, and people have been practicing there for some years. And one of the specific projects they tried to work on was in reducing the numbers of children being hit. That, you know, and this is a big broad brushstroke statement, but in general, it was thought that in order to raise a child well, that physical violence towards the child was a very normal and necessary way of raising the child. And when they looked at trying to figure out how to address violence, they created spaces for people to share. And of course, what had happened was, you know, a boy was beaten when he was a child. He grew up and beat his wife and his children. And then the child would also go into school, and it was very normal for a teacher to be able to beat a child as well. So they could, what they were able to do was sense the amount of suffering that they were in. And I think that gave them energy to try and do something. And they felt like very little agency. Like no one felt, I will show you the way out. Like I will teach you all how to do something. So none of them stepped forward to go, oh, I have a better way. But what they did say was that they would be able to sit in a circle and listen to each other. And that's where they began. They began by creating listening circles where everyone could come. In Wake Up Schools, we call it circle sharing. Sometimes it's called Dharma sharing, where you can just come and speak experientially from your lived experience and have that received by the group. And that slowly, as we share in together, we start to build a collective wisdom and understanding. So we start to know each other, and people's humanity just increases and increases. So I thought I would mention Uganda's wonderful work. What they do now with schools is that if a school has a record of not hitting a child for maybe 2 seasons, that they will get a calligraphy, Happy Teachers Change the World. So I am waiting for the day when I get to post out that calligraphy. Thank you.
Thank you, Orla. Thank you. I know Mika would like to add something to the topic, and then we had a question in the stream that Amy may comment as well. So this will be the procedure. Mika.
Yeah, just to respond to your question, Gabor, I think some of the cutting edges that we need to consider is how do we become even more engaged and responsive to contemporary issues. We are a lot of academics, and we tend to think in 3 or 4 years or even longer. And we are a lot of Buddhists, which tends to think in 3 or 4 lifetimes or even longer. And I think it's important that the value of contemplative education is also correlated and connected to contemporary issues like issues of equity, which has been a huge issue in the past year, issues of around the environment, so that we don't become, it's not a thing that's only going to solve this within the next 20 years, but we actually engage directly with some of these issues and make sure that these issues are also at the center of our programs. Another aspect, I think, is how do we engage the youth themselves? A lot of these programs are about adults working with young people, but how do we engage, how do we empower the youth to take action themselves? The youth are so ready, the youth are empowered already. I mean, they are taking a lead when it comes to solving the environmental crisis. How do we support them and engage them in this path as well? Another aspect is scaling the implementation of our programs. I think is really important. I think Katherine published a very important piece of research recently. How do we a lot of us, because we are a lot of programs have been focusing on getting the quality right, which is of course very important, but we are facing a I mean, the issues that we are facing, we need to reach a large scale in order to actually solve environmental crisis within the next 20 years. So we need to let go a little bit of our kind of like darlings within our and trying to really care for the quality of program and look at how can we also reach a larger scale, and related to that, when we do that, how do we make it culturally responsive? One size doesn't fit all. So how do we on one hand balance fidelity to a certain program and while scaling it also make it adaptable and responsive to the local cultural context? So these are at least four issues I think would be really interesting to explore further.
Thank you, Mikkel. I wonder if Michael would like to add something. Maybe Ronnie. Ronnie,
No, I'm just leaving, and I
no.
want to leave, and I want to leave nicely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
So,
much.
so I will say to you, Mikkel, that one of the answer to your thing, we're starting in kindergarten, 3 to 6. Where I have 2 studies that suggest that they're a wonderful group. The brain is pretty plastic. You start them early and you follow them through school. Maybe thing will infiltrate in. But that's not the only answer, and I respect all your big question that you asked. Sorry that I have to leave, guys. It was a pleasure seeing you. See you in another time. Bye-bye. Take care.
So we will keep going on. Michael, maybe you want to add something yourself to this question, because you were the only one who hasn't just spoken yet.
Yeah, what came into my mind, Gabor, when you asked the question was just one word actually, which was courage. And it kind of took me a while to figure, well, what does that mean, you know? And I think it relates to, I think there's different elements to it, but I feel like that's kind of what's needed in this space. I think, for instance, one area where that applies is the need for kind of more systemic change. So a lot of mindfulness programs have come into schools and slot into the existing curriculum and slot into the existing aims of the curriculum. And they do a lot of good. But I think for more deeper, long-lasting change, we actually need to change some of the culture of the schools, you know? I mean, I have an example. My brother was trained to be an English teacher for a while. And when he was in his English teacher training year, he was seeing somewhere between 350 and 400 students a week. So he literally had no possibility to actually develop connection or relationships with any of the students. And he was working in a tough part of Glasgow where tons and tons of kids are all experiencing all kinds of difficulties. And, you know, we know that for student engagement, like relationships are key. And we also know for the well-being, like a good relationship with an adult, a caring adult is going to be really vital. But in that systemic context, there just wasn't the possibility for that. So, you know, one of the things that I'm really interested in is the increasing amount of scientific research that comes out about what is conducive to human flourishing. And the funny thing is our education system does all of these things that completely fly in the face of it. And there's a kind of an inertia to it. So I think it really takes, it takes a kind of a courage amongst really like everybody in this call and everybody in this field and all people in other related fields, to just stand up and keep demanding the change bit by bit, you know, to demand that teachers get more space and time, to demand that, for instance, we talked about the motivation. If we know that mindfulness is good for teachers, why don't we have a room within a school where teachers can practice every day? Like these are the little things that if we actually stand up and have the courage to demand, then we can start seeing more profound and deeper changes, you know? So yeah, that's what kind of came to mind for me.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for answering this one particular question that I raised. And now we can move to the question that we see in the Zoom chat. Janin or Yanin, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. The question from your side is, I have no micro camera, but do have a question for Katherine. What is your view on teaching basic psychology at schools? For instance, a secular version of Buddhist psychology. Psychological understand can help with motivation, probably. And Amy, you may want to share your comment in association with that question. that you
Yeah.
did in the chat that you may want to
And
share it with everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Gabor. Thank you, and hi everyone. I'm completely blown away by everything that you're saying. It's just these huge questions and this big path you're laying in walking here. Just amazing. My question comes as an outsider when I saw Janine's question about psychology, and when I heard Ronnie talk about the intrapsychic conflict that there exists in the Israeli society, in the city in Israel, given the diversity and given the history and the conflicts. I was wondering, so when Janine mentioned psychology, I was thinking about my practice, because I'm not a teacher, I'm really an outsider, but I'm learning a lot. So I'm learning a lot, rather. But I work a lot with meditators as a psychotherapist with meditators. And they come to me, or they're sent to me sometimes by their Buddhist teachers or masters or whatever, to work on themselves in ways that will ameliorate in some way or another their capacity to meditate. And one big question that many of us discuss, both with patients and with the Buddhist teachers that I'm in contact with and that I know, is this question of resistance to change and resistance to meditation. And so I think it's one thing to teach, it's another thing to put someone in that's already a subject-object thing, but I'm thinking in terms of teaching is sort of a subject-object word. You know, you have a teacher and you have students, and how do you shift the relationship? It's really an intersubjective relationship between two subjects, which is the only way in terms of my work, for example, to try to get in some way, and it's really intractable, the problem of resistance. People say, I know I should sit, and I don't. It's that simple. I get up in the morning and I walk by my cushion, you know. And of course, these resistances are all through our psyche. So I'm wondering whether, you know, just from this perspective of working with, either Buddhist psychology or version, I think Dee Claxton is interested in this, working with some kind of version of psychology in order to complement the path, is something that is part of anybody's vision in this area. So I've talked a long time, sorry.
Thank you, Amy. No, that's fine, thank you. So Katherine, you were addressed with the original question.
Well, I kick off this. I'm sure everyone's got. There's a lot of questions going on in here. Just to pick a few of them out, I think schools and teachers need to be informed by psychology and by neuroscience, and that's a slightly different business than teaching psychology to children. And I think we come back all the time in contemplative education to beginning with the teachers, to their skills, their embodiment, their capacities. Because if teachers themselves are well educated in psychology, not necessarily Buddhist psychology, but I'm not sure about Buddhist psychology. I think it's all psychology and it's informed by Buddhist awareness. If it's true kind of thing. But I think an awareness of psychology and neuroscience is growing in schools. And I think that's very helpful. There's not enough of it. I'm very much struck by the difference between the Finnish education system, where teachers are all trained to master's level and really trained to be, or educated to master's level and expected to be professionals who make their own sense of this. And the UK system, where training for teachers is very short and focused on curricula and, you know, doing it in sort of teaching kids in kind of tips for teachers, classroom management kind of ways. And I think if we can revitalize the professionalism of the teaching profession and help them to develop their capacities, then this work starts to flow into classrooms and into schools in an intelligent way. And I think that's very much what is needed, because you can't teach gobbits of this to kids. That's not really how it works. You need intelligent teachers who understand it, who know what to impart or to discuss with children at the right time and place. So I'm nervous of everything becoming a kind of program or a project that we dump on kids. I think we need well-educated teachers. And I wish there was more of this, and that every teacher was educated to the kind of level that Finnish teachers are, because it makes a huge difference to the Finnish education system. And many of us who are teaching programs in this field are playing catch up all the time, trying to help teachers to catch up with missing gaps. And I think the other area I would say is that we work with teachers. We're not in the business of deciding what's good for teachers and dumping it on them. All of these discussions we're having about resistance to change and how do we help people change applies, to all of us, and we work alongside teachers on that one. And just a final point about this walking past the cushion. I'm increasingly aware that formal sitting practice is not for everyone all the time. And I think we slightly fetishize this idea that the only way to be mindful or to be present is to engage in formal meditation. And I heard what Orlaith was saying about living this work, finding work through nature or embodiment or presence to help everybody to live the attitudes of kindness, compassion, presence, focusing the attention on what matters. These are things you can do in many ways. And for some people, some of the time, formal practice is helpful. But I think we've made a rod for our own backs, really, by overdoing the emphasis on that. But that may be a controversial thing to say, and I'd love to know what my colleagues think of that. Oops.
Thank you, Katherine. Hola, Mika. Yeah.
I have just one very brief comment, and that is that the first thing we teach the children is to distinguish between what's pleasant, what's neutral, and what's unpleasant. And that's a very simple category. But if you learn to distinguish that, and then you learn how to focus on what's pleasant and neutral, and to some extent respond to what's unpleasant in different ways, and we give them different techniques, and we don't actually invite them to focus on what's unpleasant. We invite them to focus on the part of their body that feels safe and comfortable right now. And that's the simplest way of teaching psychology, and in that way we develop what we call body literacy. And then we move on slowly throughout our program. We move to more classical attention practices, and we explore what's called the Eve and Paul Ekman's work around the Atlas of Emotion. So in this way we're starting to building the map of what we refer to as the map of the mind. So those are some ways that we are actually teaching psychology, if you like, at all age levels.
Thank you, Mika. That has actually answered Annie Block's question that we can read in the chat, which was, knowing teaching the way the brain, the body works is enough. Is teaching psychology also necessary? So you were highlighting some examples how that could work. And Orla, Michael, would you like to address this set of questions as well, one way or another?
Do I have anything else to add? So I think, our practice is an embodied practice and not an intellectual one. But I do think that knowledge or presenting how the mind works can really just kind of cut through for people and really bring them very deeply into an understanding of their own thought patterns. So, often in our practice, we would describe the mind as a garden, and that we all have unlimited seeds. So there's potential for, happiness, sadness, murderous rage, whatever. And that we need to look at the conditions under which those seeds come up. And so when we practice with children, sometimes people shy away from practicing with children because they have an end result in mind. Like they actually want the child to not have a temper tantrum. And that's really why they're trying to teach a child mindfulness. They want a child to not be cranky and to be obedient. And for me, my business, in terms of my only interest in practicing with a child, is to nourish the conditions under which wholesome seeds can manifest. And whether they manifest that day in that session or in 20 years' time is not my business. And so that creates a very open environment for practicing with children, that all you have to do is show up with a kind, open heart, and then adjust your wisdom to nourish these seeds. So we practice to take care of wholesome seeds that we know contribute to our sense of well-being and our collective sense of well-being. And we learn to take care of the seeds that cause us suffering and we know cause everybody else in our life and the planet suffering. So there's always those two elements of learning how to skillfully address what's coming up. And the wonderful thing that I see in people is that when you describe it as seeds, they've just inherited them. Like, they might think I'm an angry person or I'm a bold child, but actually it's not so personal. Like, they didn't ask for those seeds. They arrived with a seed very well watered, very plump and very easy to germinate. And so, you know, it's theirs to take care of and to, you know, care appropriately for their whole life, but it's not so personal. And so that can give a lot of, it can take a lot of the guilt and shame that people can get into when we practice mindfulness, that actually they're treating themselves as a big self-help project. And, you know, that's not great either. So for me, I try and use enough to help people and, you know, to keep the mind interested. We like learning new things, and it can really help us to see ourselves, to see a pattern and know that, oh, that's well researched and somebody studied that. But really then we need to keep coming back to, like, what is the lived experience and what do I notice and what can I do about that? Thank you.
Thank you, Orla. Mikkel, if I may ask you once more, and then we will soon wrap up the discussion.
Yeah, I guess with regards to the question about sharing the kind of psychological science or any of the findings from the science, it definitely makes it into our programs in a big way. We find that it's another layer of learning that can be really, really powerful, you know. So we'll introduce the idea of neuroplasticity, and how we find that, like, that's kind of a foundational idea in both our programs. This idea that our brain can change and grow, and we actually have agency in how our brain is wired is just kind of a deep idea, I think, that young people can really latch onto. I think it also connects, I mean, from a kind of different framework, it kind of connects to the Buddhist notion of Buddha nature, that we actually have this incredible potential within us that's just kind of untapped to some degree. But what we also find that like, just teaching at that level, at the level of ideas or the intellect or concepts, is a little bit too shallow, we find. So for a lot of young people, one of the dangers, I think, with teaching mindfulness is it becomes a little bit like saying to young people, you should brush your teeth or you should eat vegetables. You know, they're told 101 things that are good for them and that they should do for their general well-being. But it's not getting any, you know, most teenagers that I know aren't interested in eating vegetables and brushing their teeth. They want to drink alcohol and go out and do all kinds of things we'd be horrified about, you know? So we find, so as well as the concepts, one of the things that we try and link it to is activate some kind of feeling or emotion with it, you know? So I give you an example. We in our summer program for teenagers, we share some research about happiness and money and income and how the relationship between them actually kind of breaks down. And so we start to explore this idea that actually the mind that we bring to life is as important to our happiness and well-being as the circumstances. And one of the ways that we bring this to life is we actually play a clip from the movie The Shining, where the wee boy is kind of cycling through the hotel and it's quite a lot of anxiety and the soundtrack is really scary. And then we play the same clip again, but with different music on it. And of course, what this does is it's very funny because now the kids are watching the same clip, but it's got like the Eye of the Tiger on it or some like old soul song or something. And so the emotional experience is completely different, even though the clip is exactly the same. And so it highlights that, you know, the circumstance is the same, the mind is different, we have a different experience. So we find that if you can activate, what you want to do in this teaching is activate different levels, different, not just the mind, but actually activate the heart, actually activate the emotional. If you can bring in kinesthetic learning as well, all of this serves to really strengthen the learning in a much more powerful way. Yeah. So I'd say on that.
Thank you, Michael. I'm sure we all have a lot of questions still and a lot more to add. Kevin Hawkins is writing to us because he can't contribute with live questions, just such a rich topic and some fascinating thought lines. Sorry, I couldn't participate more directly this evening. Thank you all so much for the discussion and also for the video presentations. Great stuff. Best to all. Thank you, Kevin, for your blessing, and thank you all for your participation, your sharing of experiences and the learning you have developed over the years and your responses to the questions that were raised. I personally feel that the question we were discussing in the last round around resistance is something to explore further in the field of education and more general at MLE. So I'm sure we will come back to this point in our discussions, in our meetings, in our further communication with you all and with our guests who were here with us today. Thank you for your participation, joining and asking these questions as well. I would just like to highlight an upcoming event next week in the MLE Friends group, which is Donata Schöller's presentation on embodied critical thinking. This is going to be an interesting topic, again, building bridges between meditation and a more abstract way of doing philosophy. So they are going to share their projects and their learnings and their challenges as well in this particular project that they established in their university. So I'm looking forward to hearing her and welcoming you back who were here with us today and in the next meetings. Thank you for joining and thank you all for contributing to this important topic.
Yeah, I also just want to say that I have to leave now because I'm piloting our high school curriculum with a group of students, and they kindly agreed to meet half an hour later today so that I could participate in most of this session.
Thank you.
I have to be with them now. So thank you everyone for very inspiring presentations. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for curating it, Katherine and Gabor, and supporting the technique from Nina and Ute. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Ute and Nina, for your work as well. Thank you, Mika, for joining and participating all the way through the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Katherine, you may want to say something too.
I just wanted to add that to thank Kevin Hawkins particularly for his comment, and to say that Kevin presented in one of the earlier series, and to encourage people to keep spreading the news about the various series because they go together very well. Kevin could have easily been part of the discussion we've had today. He has done some fabulous work around the themes we're talking about, so I'd very much recommend folks looking up his work. He's published a new book recently, so you know we've got a very rich community here, I think, and you know, and I'm conscious almost of the people who aren't here who could have had a lot to say in answer to your questions, Gabor.
Sure.
So, I think we've done our best together, but these are very rich questions, and I would like to thank you for your questions, actually, Gabor. I think they've really helped us to hone in on what matters. But just to thank everyone who came, from my point of view, and such a rich discussion. I've found it. I sort of came to this thinking, well, another Zoom, and it's been riveting from my point of view. I've been absolutely riveted by this. The richness of the thinking and the inquiry has been fantastic. So I go away from here inspired, personally.
Thank you, Katherine. Thank you all for joining. We will soon end the recording and also the session. So please forgive us to cut the call at one point, but I'm staying until everyone is leaving. And if you want to say something while leaving, just say anything you want.
I should have thanked Nina and Utter as well. Nina's been painstaking in spreading the words, and Utter in managing the technology. So thank you. And it's always lovely to see you, Amy. Your questions are always challenging but fascinating.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Everybody, I was just amazed. It's really. I haven't seen all the presentations yet, I have to admit, but I'm going to go straight to them, and I think I have a lot to learn from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.